Hi, y'all. It is, thank you, Ken Porter. And thank you, spouse, for your hotspot. So, pun intended. So, ow. So, I am appreciative for the second time to be before you. I have to say it sometimes is a little nerve-wracking because I thought, well, like, what more do I have to say? Like, I said what I needed to say. What y'all want to talk about? So what I've decided to do in a very narrative tradition, I want to share with you an intro to my book. You're getting it here for the first time. I'm going to share it with some of you at the Goose. For those of you who are a part of our virtual digital Hush Harbor Pink Rope Chronicles and the after, which is called The Clearing, then you have heard parts of it. I don't think you would have heard all that I'm about to read. I want to say that there are some triggering spaces, there's a couple lines about sexual violation, so I want to say that up front. And ultimately, the title of this book is called Going Live Without Sanction, but Not Without Sanctuary. And it's about Black women preaching in the digital age. And this particular part that I'm going to read, and hopefully we'll have time for some conversation. I want to hear some stuff back from you, if you feel so inclined. I have read it before in smaller groups, and it has been so arresting that you're just silent, and I acknowledge that also. So unlike the other day when I told you needed to say something back to me, I acknowledge that sometimes things just need to hang with you. I also acknowledge that this is sacred space. And again, as I said Thursday, all of you now have been initiated into a community for me that has to be strong enough to hold my truth. I am not a monolith as one who identifies as an African American woman. While I'm a cisgender heterosexual woman, I acknowledge the privileges that I hold in that particular space, and also acknowledge that some of my examples speak to what is my lived experience, but also live into a space that is welcoming, radically welcoming, inclusive, and affirming. So with that, I want to present to you what is identified as stretching the kink. And I want to invite you to put on your holy listening ears. Close your eyes if you have to, and just go with me here. Amen. My mother said that I was born into the world with intense ashe. Ashe is the Yoruba word describing the mystical force and quality which makes words once uttered come true. The conditions of my conception and birth were tumultuous. Twice external circumstances attempted to thwart my arrival. Tootie, her family nickname, was 19 years old when she married my father, who was home on a 30-day furlough before being shipped off to Vietnam. As a Black man in America, he had his own challenges, which the war only exacerbated. By the time my mother was 20, she was pregnant with me. My grandmother and others strongly encouraged my mom to terminate the pregnancy. The pandemic of racial, gender, and class inequity and inequality confined their imagination to only what they'd lived through as poor Black women from the South who had migrated to the North to work in factories and other labor-intensive jobs. They'd experienced relationships with partners too wounded by the circumstance of their race, gender, and debased station in life to show up fully. Women like my grandmother possessed spiritual gifts that competed for space in bodies that had been worn by the extremities of cruel realities. Fathers with not so distant memories of being called boy, feeling defeated because they couldn't save their sons from incurring violence in the streets of a socially disoriented country or in the deep jungles of Southeast Asia. Mothers who worked out their anxiety praying on their knees, emotionally fragile children who grew up to be adults with trust issues. The community of my birth was filled with each. Per my mother, after begrudgingly arriving to the doctor to have the procedure, she felt me move in her stomach with force and power. She leaped from the table and told the doctor and her family that she could not go through with it. And while working at a politically left law firm, she was introduced to the rhetoric of Chilean-born Cuban revolutionary Che Guevara. She immersed herself in learning more and more about revolutionary change. She started attending Black Panther Party meetings and later showed interest in the Nation of Islam. My dad returned from Vietnam more broken than he was before going. The worst fears of the women who tried to deter my mother from committing to my birth had come true. My mother became the repository of my father's frustration and confusion. A man raised by a single parent, too poor to dream and too defenseless to escape the harsh reality of being Black in America, my father physically and emotionally abused my mother in unimaginable ways. It is agonizing to hear her recall the pain that shot through her body when my dad kicked her in her stomach while she was carrying me. The circumstances of her life then seemed to work against my safe arrival, but she willed me into being. Once I arrived, she would name me Shay because she said I was her revolutionary, whom she credits with saving her life. Years would pass before I was able to harness this power as a forward-thinking Black preaching woman attending to the exigent nature of intersectional oppressions in ways that heal and transform. And during the late 70s through the mid 80s, it was not uncommon to hear young Black girls, Tana, in my neighborhood chanting what some might deem sexually charged affirmations, also known as street cheers. Cheers like Miss Lucy, give me body, and Hollywood go swinging, Hollywood go swinging, swing it to the north side. Y'all know. These were filled with edgy directives and accompanied by rhythmic movement that, according to many, was suggestive of adult experiences. Our favorite place to congregate was on the sidewalk at the corner of Reed and West 16th Avenue. And see, the Johnsons lived on that corner. And Miss Johnson, a short, ample-sized Black woman with a heavy bust, was the community mother who saw and heard everything. We were all members of Fifth Baptist Church, and some of us were sent and others of us attended with our families. Sunday school was a must. I attended with my grandmother because my mother had sworn off church. When she sought wise counsel about her abusive marriage, the male pastor admonished her by quoting scripture that classified divorce as a sin against God. Miss Johnson's visits to church, they were infrequent too. But she sent her daughter, Janae, my best friend. And even still, the directive Miss Johnson often gave while we performed our cheer dance to get somewhere and sit down, drawing attention to yourself, moving and gyrating like some loose woman, was veiled in Black church respectability politics. As Black church girls growing up in a working class neighborhood in Pittsburgh, Steel Valley, most of our grandparents brought with them from the deep South their God, their rituals, and their desire to assimilate, to be seen as human. So we were aware to some extent of the sacred and secular spirit over flesh conversation that often characterized young Black girls wearing cutoff jeans, halter tops, and flip-flops, playing outside and laughing loudly as rambunctious, ostentatious, promiscuous even, opposite of ladylike, decent, and respectable. This way of policing the oracular imaginations and bodily movements of Black girls who would become women was not bound to Sunday mornings, but made its ways from masculine rhetorical pulpits to neighborhood front porches like Miss Johnson's. Negotiating the space of the sidewalk and the sanctuary is my earliest memory of stretching. Stretching is rooted in Black hair care rituals. Growing up, Black girls got their hair stretched for special occasions, usually picture day at school and Easter Sunday. Stretching is risky, and depending on the tightness of one's natural coil, it is a painful process. For the stylist has to manipulate the natural twist of the hair with products and tools in order to achieve a desirable look, usually long and straight. The stylist's skill is evident only when one can stretch the natural kink without tearing or breaking. The consequences of tearing or breaking leads to sometimes permanent damage. The perceived trade-off measured in anti-black racist standards is manageability. If you can stretch your hair, then you can be managed. Stretched hair then was meant to be tamed, perfectly coiffed, presentable. Maintaining stretched hair required measured or subdued actions. Sweat, usually caused by movements expressed in dance, playing, and other forms of excitement, were antithetical to pressed, another description of stretched hair. Non-stretched hair represented defiance, difficult to manage, and unruliness. And occasions like Picture Day and Easter Sunday demanded an acceptable public-facing image in church and society in a manner that suggested the unmanipulated coil did not. So stretching then is a metaphor that I use to talk about two things. One, I deploy stretching to nuance the sacred and secular struggle Black girls who would unknowingly become Black preaching women endure as a complex component of their identity formation. Stretching describes what Sharice Jones and Camilla Shorter Gooden define as shifting, which is a spiritual and social modification Black women in America perform in their everyday lives. To be stretched, then, is to constantly live in what W.E.B. Du Bois named double consciousness, a two-ness, two warring identities in one dark body. Here, the battle is between the silenced and the voice, the visible and the invisible, the sacred and the secular, the pulpit and the pew. Stretching was embedded in my everyday life. It shaped my way of being in the world. And although the pulpit and the corner were both epistemic sites of Black pain and Black joy, it was always clear yet exhausting that the way we moved here should never cross the threshold there. There was a choice to be made about how to show up, how to move, and how to speak. Girls who followed instructions and presented themselves in an acceptable fashion were rewarded with leadership positions. Wrong behavior, which was almost always gendered, brought on shame. Like many times I recall unmarried pregnant women being forbidden to serve in various ministries like the choir or the usher board. They could only return if they publicly apologized to the congregation represented by the all-male deacon board. And once, when I was on the junior usher board, I was remanded for willfully walking across the pulpit. The pulpit was designated sacred space, and only men's bodies could serve as portals to bring forth the Spirit. I was demoted and no longer able to retrieve the offering from church officers and auxiliary members. Stretching is not inherent, but a learned and often taxing competence. Hips that dip to soulful rhythm and blues music, mouths that sip brown liquor, and hands used to slam down trump cards at the bid whist table on Friday and Saturday nights were the same hips that steadied Black women's bottoms rocking from side to side, trying to contain the Holy Ghost. The same mouths that shouted, "Thank you, Jesus," and the same hands lifted toward the sky with adoration during worship services. Sunday morning praise erased the stench of Friday and Saturday night, at least until after church. Stretching is also not simply an embodied, mediated act of either or, but also and mostly always both and. Outside of Picture Day and Easter Sunday, Black girls' coils were wearable masterpieces of art. Dancing on sidewalks with my unstretched hair cornrowed in an intricate geometric style with beads hanging on the ends fastened with small pieces of aluminum foil is where I could clearly hear my voice in a way that was controlled and directed in church. My beads created a vibration when I swung my neck from side to side. It was a particular language that yielded confidence in ways that black girls were silenced and intentionally not seen. Beaded hair rendered them visible and agential. I vividly remember this call that my prepubescent girlfriends and I would sing together in our budding community of womanish girls. There was something that happened when we caught the spirit and alongside our unique kink switched our less than developed derrieres to the hand clapping and foot stomping of invisible drums we could only hear in unison. It was a summoning of sorts, the conjuring of a power too deep to name and too broad to confine. This childhood ritual performance introduced me to my oddly shaped but burgeoning body. Yet in the most awkward times of a young girl's life, I also remember that he never told me not to tell anyone, and I never told him that I would. Our interactions didn't permit conversation. A brief greeting followed by a loud silence and blank stares. And I cannot recall how I ended up so close in proximity to him that I could feel his breath on the back of my neck. I am unable to place the moment of getting up from my usual position in front of the television. I do not remember the first time or how many times. I only remember it happened. He was the relative of my adult babysitter. He was a teenager, and I was an elementary school girl, and it was the other side of stretching. The warring between a prepubescent body and that of a physically mature anatomy. Assembled with my girls making beats with our feet, I felt empowered though. And we mimicked movements we watched our parents and older siblings do when songs like the Commodore's Brick House came on, or Rufus featuring Shaka Khan's Sweet Thing came on. And even in those moments of my early youth, unable to name the act of stretching, I had not yet become consciously imprisoned by patriarchal and racist or future negative iconography of my soon-to-be commodified body. I had not yet begun to fully understand the struggle with Euro-American imposed value contradictions and a white racist redemption requirement which redeemed my soul and left my body steeped in the muck and the mire of systemic injustices. I knew that it existed because I would listen to the elders talk, but I had not yet encountered the reprobate mentality of rogue bureaucracies that killed unarmed black people. Immersed in the Black Baptist church tradition, I would one day learn that living an embodied life and loving myself regardless as the womanist directive demands would become more than a notion. Notwithstanding the relentless nature of misogynoir, white racist patriarchy, and Christian hegemony, I tapped into the holies of holies within my being, the secret garden of possibilities. How was it that stretching taught me what Ntozake Shange gave to black women and girls as the golden rule in for color girls who consider suicide when the rainbow is enough? How was I able to find God in myself and love her fiercely in a society that damned my race, that damned my gender, that damned my class? Reflecting back, it was a powerful contradiction. On one hand, to be void of guilt, shame, or stereotypical historical references, and on the other hand, to be in an organic space of being, of basking in flesh that was home to caramel-colored skin and ashy knees and long legs and raisins for breasts and eyes that my mama said could stare a grown woman down. But I never said stop. And I never cried. And we never talked. And he would pull me close to him and rub against me in a circular motion. And I'm not sure why no one thought it strange for me to be alone in a room with a teenage boy. I couldn't control or explain the feelings that would release in my body, the tingling sensations that would happen without warning. And he never told me to keep quiet. And I never told him that I would. Silence It was my armor of protection. It was also a weapon of mass destruction. It created long-standing patterns of emotional and spiritual trepidation. I was touted as being a messianic figure whose arrival was salvific. And on the other hand, I was raised with trauma and uncertainty, denied the experience to rely on adults to shield me from harm. I was denied the innocence of my youth and refused the softness of mothering. Silence was survival. I used silence to suppress anger, shame, and a sense of powerlessness. Silence was relegated to one cavity of my heart, and I named it the numb place. The numb place is where I sentenced harmful people, places, memories, and even parts of myself. From this numb place grew the tension between believing and not believing that my voice storied sacred worth. I was like the kink, tightly wound, unwavering, and resolute with my silence about certain happenings and loud about others. Like I was unable to clearly articulate the trauma I held in my body. It was the trauma passed on to me at the molecular level through DNA. The distress of being blamed and lauded for buoyancy I was voluble to. I attended Catholic school for the first grade, and our assignment was to write a letter to Santa Claus, and I declined, and when asked why, I declared, because Santa Claus ain't real, and we don't have a chimney. Or the time when I played Glinda the Goodrich in our neighborhood center's rendition of the musical The Wiz during a thunderstorm, which every boom of thunder, my performance of the song Believe in Yourself bolstered. I would not be silenced. So what does it mean to think about the set of experiences that come to silence those with powerful ashe, the tension between power and powerlessness, and stretching and silenced or tightly coiled represents Black women's preaching praxis in North America broadly and online specifically. It illumines how often without sanction, but not without sanctuary, Black preaching women have lived between dynamism and tenderness, being vocal about certain lived experiences and expected to keep silent about others, all while creating and curating their own spaces of self-authorization. Thank you. Whew. I am an embodied being, as we all are, but I am also very in touch and in tune with what happens in my body, particularly as I am reading and or recalling. And I want to invite you now, I invite questions or comments, because I'm also pushing for those of you who are, even if you're not faith leaders, but I imagine many of you are, if you are acknowledging what happens in your body when you are sharing and speaking and the ways in which people connect with you as they are hearing you communicate. So I'll pause now and invite comments or questions or whatever you want to do next. And I'm cool with silence.
Pink Robe Chronicles,
Hi, Reverend
Sanctuary. I appreciate you bringing to the forefront about silence. And for those of us who are leaders in the sanctuary, I think it's important that even as we experience being silenced in the sanctuary, that we begin to push against that to get our congregations to open up. So I appreciate your naming it silence.
Thank you, Glency. Thank you, Reverend Glency.
Thank you. That was really powerful.
Thank you.
And part of your story, I won't use the right language, but you talked about like these opposing or sides within you. Can you say a little bit more about where you are with that now?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. Thank you for being able to hear that. So I'm kind of also, if you will, it's kind of like a performance art piece, kind of, sort of, because the whole thing I'm kind of going back and forth. I'm speaking from a place where I've found voice, but I'm also acknowledging where the silence has lived for such a long time. And that often, and again, I'm only speaking from my lived experience, right, as a Black woman, and you have your own intersections wherever you enter that intersection. I'm suggesting that the things that cause me silence, many of them were in my faith tradition and in my church community, and the ways in which young Black girls' bodies were policed, and policed in a way that was an attempt to protect us from pedophiles, from harmful people. But in a way, it silenced us and shut us down so much that we almost were hidden from ourselves. And so to now, as one who speaks publicly, right, who's a preacher who preaches the gospel and who speaks publicly for her living, for her existence, I oftentimes have to be in communication with this body, because this body is both, it displays, but it is displayed upon. And what do I mean? That means that before, I know, don't get offended. I know some of y'all be like, I'm colorblind, I don't see color. You know, I don't see color. Like, I was raised, and I'm like, bless your heart. You absolutely see me, and if you don't, you should. I want you to. I don't want you to be colorblind when you see me. You need to see every piece. You need to see these braids. You need to see all of me. Period. Don't erase me in an attempt for this sort of utopian society where we don't see one another. We need to see each other. But that also means that I know when I show up in a particular way that there are already assumptions made about me, as I make about other people, right? I made assumptions about you based on my own history, based on my lived experience, based on what I've seen on the news, based on where we're located, right? And many of them may not even be true. It's because we are a visual culture, because what we see and in what we hear, we make these assumptions. And so where I am now with it is, I'm just free. What does that mean? Like, it's costly to be free. Thank you, friend. Yeah, sweet.
I felt my heart skip just a beat when you talked about stretching. At the point when you said, that the hair can be broken,
You got it.
and sometimes cause permanent damage. I don't know about that, but I want to. What happened in you when you wrote that?
I'm snickering because my grandmama would say, I know you ain't crying in front of white people, are you? I am crying also because you got it. Like, you all got these moves that I was making, that I attempted to make subtle. So let me share with you. Ethnic care in general, some forms of ethnic care is kinky. But what a Euro-centered standard of beauty has posited is that the correct standard of beauty is long, straight hair. And so people whose natural coil grows out of their head curly and or kinky, some of us, because we have lived, if you grew up if you either grew up in the American South or if somebody in your family grew up in the American South, even though you had they'd migrated from the North. Respectability means that your folk attempted to make you assimilate to dominant culture and dominant appearance with the hope that you would be treated as a human being. But we know that that really doesn't work. And so many black women and other women of color have spent countless dollars trying to straighten and stretch their hair with the hope of being seen as acceptable at work. This is why we have now what's called the Crown Act. The Crown Act comes because that make it illegal to discriminate against women for wearing their natural hair the way it grows out of their head. The fact that folk can say that your natural hair is problematic and this is how it grows out of your head speaks to, right? So the point that you picked up so clearly was that in my community, if a stylist was not skilled enough to stretch your hair without breaking it, it could cause permanent damage, meaning that your hair would never grow back in that space. I'm using that allegorically or metaphorically. With y'all English teachers, you know what I'm trying to say. I'm using that to say that, and so when you spend your life trying to fit into a standard of not just beauty, but a standard of knowledge. I am an assistant professor, it is no secret, at Wake Forest University School of Divinity. And what I'm about to say is not just about Wake. Wake is actually a great place. Our dean, Dr. Corey Walker, is an amazing person, and I have some wonderful colleagues. This is about the academy in general, right? And some of you all who have been seminary trained. There is a way in which, as Patricia Hill Collins gives to us, there's this knowledge validation process. And this knowledge validation process is controlled usually by heterosexual, middle-aged white men. That means that if there is a new thought, a new idea that I have, if I'm going to write this like I've written, that in order for me to receive validation as a scholar, as an academic, and even or to get tenure, then I have to let it cross your eyes. And if you have no inkling of what I'm talking about, you can then mark it as invalid and suggest that nobody wants to hear that, it's not true, that's not. And so then what happens is now you have not only stretched my coil, but you have permanently damaged it, because it suggests that my lived experience or the lived experiences of the members of my community are not valid, that only certain types of knowledges and certain types of ways of knowing and being are considered valid. And while we say that's the academy, that's also in the church. Why is it in the church? It is important for us to acknowledge, and other faith traditions, right? Not just church, right? Because I really identify as spiritually fluid, so there's that. But in the church, in a sense that we get uncomfortable, some of us, when folks offer us interpretations that we've not been socialized to see as normal. We get really uncomfortable, me included, right? Me included, with images, or maybe not y'all in here with images, right? If I come to certain houses of worship and I see white Jesus, I'm uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable, friend. I'm uncomfortable because white Jesus is connected. Hear me when I say this. White Jesus is connected to whiteness, and whiteness is not the same as being white. Y'all understand that? Do you understand that? Right? So I want you to relax a little when you're hearing people talk about whiteness, right? They're not talking about white folk, or they are talking about white supremacist ideals. But if you ain't a white supremacist, then, as grandmama say, you eat the fish or you spit out the bones. Okay? You get it? All right. Other questions, comments, anyone? Yes, please.
I've experienced a lot of Christian spaces that feel really stale to me, mm-hmm. like in your head. Mm-hmm. And I guess I feel when you talk about being born with Ashe and like feeling it like in your body, I feel most connected, like the thread that's tied to my Christian roots shows up in a womanist place. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice for someone like me, whose body I'm born into seems to preclude me from that tradition.
Y'all, let me just say, I'm so glad I came back. I mean, can I just be honest? I wasn't coming back. I was not coming back. It was the principle of a thing for me, and it was a hard no. But to come back and have this conversation and to hear all of these questions, Ashe. What do I have advice for you into how to live out womanist ideals, or can you identify as womanist? Is that the question? So let me back up for a little bit and let's talk about what womanism is. So womanism itself is a term that we get from prolific writer Alice Walker, really around 1978 or so, but popularized in 1983 in her book of essays called In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. And in this particular way, she tells us basically that womanist is to feminism is as lavender is to purple. And what she is acknowledging here is that the feminist movement failed in many ways to take into consideration culture and race. Class and race, thank you. And so many in the early 80s in theological education, then there were a group of black women up at Union Theological Seminary who were finding their own voices. And while the father of what is known as Liberation Black Theology, James Cone, and others were, finding this language, the black women who were in theological education did not find themselves in their layout. And so Katie Geneva Cannon, who is the first black woman ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA, Dolores Williams, and Kelly Brown Douglas, and Jacqueline Grant, utilize Alice Walker's term in religious and theological education to identify and center black women's lived experiences, that there is a particular lens and a way that black women engage, or as Dr. Jacqueline Grant would say, black women's Jesus and white women's Christ are not the same. So the question that my friend is asking, that many have asked, you didn't say this, but I'm gonna put another layer on it. So can non-black women, or folks who don't identify as black women, be womanist? There are two schools of thought. Some folk would say, nope, you can't be it. We appreciate how much you love it and how much it makes you feel good, but it's a no. Like they will say, can we have something? Can we have something for ourselves? However, if womanism is an ideology and a methodology, then the whole point, I would say, is we want more people to use it. We want more people to begin to center marginalized folks' lived experiences as their point of departure. So I would say to you, moving forward, that yes, I would include a womanist lens in everything that you're doing, the way that you're showing up, how you're doing it. And I would move gingerly. I would learn to read the room. You read the room correctly here. I would read the room, though, before. Not suggesting you would do this, but I have seen this go drastically wrong with both mansplaining and, folks want to tell certain black that they know more about womanism than they do. I don't feel like that's you. But I would just consider, one, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for understanding and acknowledging it and thinking it, not thinking it worthy enough, because it is worthy without acknowledgement, but making sure that you are decentering enough to let some other lived experiences come alongside you. And that happens just in your everyday walk. So thank you. I hope that was helpful. So my friend here, no, hold on one second. My friend here is telling me I have 10 minutes, but she also said that there's nothing else after, I got 5, but she said that there's nothing else after me in here. So if there are other questions, I'll answer. Go ahead.
I first want to say thank you for coming back. Thank you. I want to say thank you for your emotional labor it took for you to pen that chapter, that introduction. I want to say thank you for having the courage to share it here. I want to honor your experience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Melva. And I'd also
Thank you.
like to know where these fine folks can purchase and when they can purchase your book and how they can support your work and where we can find out more about you. Thank you.
I appreciate you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I just was on a call, which was I was a little late, with two Black women who are working with me, and we just put a schedule out for pre-sales. So let me just tell you how to find me and to connect on my website. That's y'all know what I'm trying to say. Subscribe on my website, yeah. When you go, that's what I'm trying to say, so that I can have your email, and so when I make that announcement, you'll have it. So my website is www.drmelvasampson.com, drmelvasampson.com. So you can, as soon as you comes up, it'll say connect with Dr. Melva. Just go ahead and put your email in there, and then you'll be a part of my MailChimp. You can also find me on social media platforms. You can go like our YouTube page, which is called Pink, P-I-N-K, Robe, like your favorite pink robe Chronicles. You can follow us and subscribe on YouTube. We are live every Sunday. Glency is here. Tana is here. We are live every Sunday at 8 a.m. What is this, Eastern Daylight? Did I say that right? ES, y'all know that time. At 8 a.m. Now, some of you like, friend, I'll catch you. You can catch the replay, right? You don't have to watch it live, but live is an experience. But you can catch the replay. Also, we have a space that is sort of a post-PR show, post-PRC that we call The Clearing, which is a digital hush harbor that just went live. The subscription part of that just went live today. So let me say this, it is an open and welcoming space for all folk, but it is decidedly Black woman centered. That does not mean you're not welcome. It just means what we're talking about is Black woman stuff. So you are actually welcome to be and to listen and to engage, right? It doesn't mean you have to come be quiet. It just means that certain lived experiences are not the center of that space. So Pink Rope Chronicles on YouTube, drmelvasampson.com on our website. When you click to be a subscriber on my website, you then will be notified on everything. And then lastly, I'm kind of trying to read the room. Most of us still on Facebook over here. But I'm on Facebook still, Instagram, Twitter, but the Book of Faces is my primary space, and Melva Sampson, you can find me there. Thank you so much for that.